Hi, I'm Paul Marobella. Welcome to New York Festival's State of the Biz one-on-ones. I am so happy to welcome my good friend Greg James, Global Chief Transformation Officer of the Havas Media Group. Greg and I have worked together for many years. We've pitched and cried and won together. We've done so many cool things, and I was so happy that he agreed to come on the show. My friend Greg.
It's great.
How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having us. Crying feels like it's the theme of today all of a sudden.
Well,
it's talking about,
you win some, you lose some.
You know, full training and therapy and tears. We won't cry here, though.
We won't cry here. Well, maybe.
All right.
Maybe. We'll get vulnerable maybe for a minute. Wow, so I don't really even know where to start with you. I was thinking all night about going back about how much we've actually done together and the work that we've done together. And you know, Greg works on my alma mater at Havas. I'm an alumni of Havas, and we've pitched so many cool things together. And I was on the creative side of the business, and you were on the media side of the business. And I use air quotes because I never really saw you that way.
Isn't it funny? No, people. I mean, I didn't originally come from the media side, but it's funny how like we have these expectations of like that's the media person, that's the creative person, that's what, and people get put in the little bucket. But yeah, it's always been. I never consider myself a media person either. So we always got on because you guys were just getting on with like, what's the big idea? Where are we going with it? What's the thing?
Right.
So that was always good. It was fluid. It was fluid.
Right. And media can be creative.
Yeah.
And creative can be media, which I think was a lot of the conversations that we had throughout the years. And not only at the account level, but you know, building the capabilities of the company. And
well, we still have it. It's all that is kind of a journey. There was a debate we were having a few days ago. We're in the middle of a big integrated pitch again. So it's like you have those flashbacks. Like I've been in this room before. It's 11 p.m. But we were having a discussion, and there were 2 or 3 teams working on their pieces. And even like 2 months into this pitch process, someone kept saying, "Well, the media people will do that," and then they were like, "Well, then it's for creative for this to happen." And I just said to the team, I was like, "Actually, you know what would really help the process is if we stopped saying the media person does this, the creative person does that, because." Like, of course, we've all got our piece of the puzzle that we do, but when you're trying to work in a way that's like, this is one team and we're doing this thing, the more that you keep reinforcing, well, he's on that team, they're on that team, they do this and they do that thing, it's a really, you just kind of continue to put the silos in place. But if I think about, you know, when we work together, when you walk into an office where you look around the space and a client comes into an agency like you guys had in Chicago at Havas at the time, the space just, you didn't know that's the media table and that's the creative space and this is planning, and because it just felt like there was a community, a sense of people doing a thing that each had their expertise, but you don't try and build the barriers in place of it.
But I think even better, even more micro than that, is that when we were in a room together, you couldn't tell who the media folk were and who the creative folk were. You would had the chief creative officer talking about media and data. You had media folks talking about how we were going to deliver that message in a really unique, personalized, targeted way.
But it's a hard thing to do because I do feel like, I mean, ironically, because I still don't see myself as a media person, but I've now basically been in a media agency in a media role for 10 years. And like time has no meaning anymore, so you have no sense of it. But I've learned a hell of a lot about the technicalities of media over that time, right? About the role that data plays, about how certain channels work, how activation works, how the buying works. I know loads of stuff, but I don't still, like, so you've had to learn a lot of things, and I guess you sort of take it for granted then when you're exposed to it, especially if you're in a senior role, you're kind of seeing all these parts of the picture. But when you've got creatives who want to be able to come up with ideas which can live in certain channels because they're PR or they live in TV in a different way, and you've got media people who want to be more creative or be able to have creative ideas, it's still like a weird training journey because there is stuff that like they don't, you know, you have to have almost like a mediation role sometimes where how do you take that big thought this creative guy just had and turn it into something that he doesn't own entirely. He doesn't get to make the 60 seconds of film of it. He gets to work with a TV producer on making the editorial part of it, or he gets to work with the publisher to turn it into something that fits with the edit of the magazine as well as the audio. Like, there's just sort of so much to learn still in the nuances of it. And that's where I think people fall down a bit.
They forget. Yeah, we're going to get into that a bit. But we first met. It was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I went back and looked, and you're right. It's been 10 years.
Uh-oh.
And you were at Cake.
Yes.
At the time, and Cake was social content, experiential. It was a very cool shop that had come into the Havas ecosystem, and that's how you came into the Havas ecosystem.
Yeah, it was, and actually, it's quite an interesting story when you think about integration, because I was in the UK. I'd been at Cake for 8 or 9 years, and at that point, we were probably 70% of the business was a PR agency in its broadest sense, but the rest of it was experiential, sponsorship, content. And one of the biggest things we'd done, and in the UK, which was at that time very restricted market for TV and alternative types of advertising, Cake had been hired by Vodafone, big global client, to do all their branded content work around sports and the sponsorships they had with Formula One and stuff like that. They were basically doing the Drive. What's the Formula One show on Netflix right now?
Drive to Survive.
Right. They were basically doing Drive to Survive
Before
with
that.
their team 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And their problem was that Vodafone was saying to their media agency, I guess I won't name, but their big global media agency, they were going, hey, we've got this access to a team and we want to tell this story. And the media agency were going, well, we can't really do that. And the CMO was going, I've got this access, like nobody else has this. And they were basically saying, look, we don't know how to measure it. You've already made investments in TV. This is going to cost a lot to produce. Like all the reasons why not to do this thing, which was clearly a very compelling thing for a brand to do. And so we were given this remit, which then grew into, $25, $30 million over the next 2 years because the media agency just did their media thing. And so Cake became, we grew even further into that kind of branded content space. And then when Havas came along, it was we needed to be more international and a bigger footprint globally. Havas knew that there was something that Cake was doing, particularly in the content space and social space, that wasn't happening in the core agency. And so we became into that. And for me, that's why when I go into a room with you at the time, I remember saying to you, I walked into your office one day and I'm like, oh my God, it's sort of really weird for me because the office you guys had in Chicago felt really like the office of the partners at Cake in London. Like the stuff that was around, the crap you'd collected from doing this deal with that artist or whatever, the clutter, right? It felt really homely and what agencies should be like. And that's what Cake had been. But then to be at Cake, I was always like the sensible guy. They were like, he wears trousers to work, like not jeans. He's wearing shoes in the office. No one's ever done that. And I'm like, I'm just showing up at my work. And because they were all a lot cooler than I was. So I always felt like the most sensible people there. Because when I walk into a media agency at Havas then years later, they're like, who is this wild guy with the crazy ideas? And I was like the wild card. And I think that difference helped me because you're like, look, I understand these two worlds.
Right.
And you covered, it's like the same as the bridge between digital and creativity, right? Where like that was a bridge for a while.
And a data piece.
Yeah.
And I think that you were a big part and still are a big part of the integration of the holding company. And one of the things that I think is a competitive advantage for Havas, I think there's a couple, but I think one of them is smaller than some of the bigger holding companies, and that allows the organization to integrate quicker, be more agile. And then of course there's the Vivendi properties that we can integrate. You can integrate in from an entertainment, music, gaming, and sports perspective. Last year, you were named Global Chief Transformation Officer. Tell us about that a bit. What was that shift for you, and what was Peter and Yannick's vision for that, and how did you get into that role?
Well, I think the first thing that happens, as you know, if you've got friends that are true friends, when you get a big job with a title as ridiculous as Chief Transformation Officer, they don't say, oh my God, this is amazing for you.
What the hell?
They send you gifts all day of Transformers, robots in disguise.
I'm going to use that one.
All I get.
You got Transformer robots?
That was Transformer robots.
That's incredible.
Just gifts all day long. So that was my supportive friendship group. But I think it came about because kind of to your point, any agency, any business, right? You have to have what's your remit? I've been the chief strategy officer for the media group for 5 years, and actually most of that 5 years was spent. I spent as much time on our strategy as an agency as I was on, tell this client where to go with X, and so in a way, becoming chief transformation officer was an evolution of that. And it was to say, right, fine, really focus on our business and where should we go. And that means there's near-term things. Okay, so in a year's budget or 2 years budget, as a media group, what are the areas that we need to diversify into, and how do we rally the CEOs of all our markets around those things? And then hopefully you should be thinking like, what in 3 years and 5 years, where do we have to go as a business? And that I think is particularly hard, because if you look at any kind of like academic perspective or like industry thought leaders on innovation and transformation, like carving out the time and space from a business to say, right, what's our business going to be in the future, and how do you build that instead of this is a really difficult thing to do. But it's been really interesting. So that it came about really to give me time and for the business to say we should think there. I think the second thing was, as you say, of all the different people in senior roles in the group, I was one of the people that was most able to straddle both sides of the group and see the perspective and say, well, what is, have what I'd say would be like creative empathy, but a media and a data understanding of what we did, and try to bridge those things. And that's interesting. And we've had more success with that. I mean, you know, I feel like we've gone through really interesting waves with how successfully we've integrated over the last 10 years. If I go back to big clients at that time, like the Sears and Kmart's of the world, those businesses were in a very different, the Dish networks, those were things that we were pretty ready nearly 10 years ago to bring those together. Think about where, you know, you can open Adweek and still today be like, should a CMO integrate? Why? How will it work? I'm like, well, it used to happen and it does happen. But I feel like we've really, the last 12 months have been really interesting. We've changed the management structures in the agency. We've changed how we tell that story about what the benefits are of bringing it together or the processes for bringing it together. And we started to win things like, and to your point about, you know, Harman Kardon in the, you know, technology space, that was a great win for us at the start of the year, also because it's in the culture space. So the Vivendi story and how can we take that kind of brand and property and bring it into film and bring it into music and do different stuff with it has been interesting part of transformation as well, I guess.
Yeah, your point about integration, I mean, I started my career 3 blocks from here, 18th and 5th. And it was a great agency, smaller shop, but fully integrated. And at the time, it didn't feel like creative and media were separate, especially in a 100 million or less shop where it was kind of like you win an account, you worked on the account together. It wasn't necessarily a media department or a creative department. And then of course, as brands got bigger and they scaled and global and DMPs and, you know, all the different software platforms came into play, which can be cost prohibitive for a smaller agency. I mean, there's case in point, there's very few smaller, independent, pure play media agencies in the US at the moment.
And it's impressive when you see them do it though, right? Like when you see a smaller agency win a really chunky client, whether it's a media independent or a creative independent, I think it's really impressive when you see it because, you know, particularly on the creative, like I think one of the things everyone's got to get smarter at, I'm yet to see really brilliant, consistently brilliant creative, which has a consistently brilliant data-led backup story as to why it's doing what it's doing, right? Because yes, you can do like DCO campaigns, like, well, we personalized it because we saw this trigger, fine. But that's actually a tactical creative execution. And then you've got, here's my big brand campaign. But that stuff in the middle that's able to really say, this is a culturally relevant, incredible campaign that breaks through, and here's the facts that back it up as to why. Like, that to me is where you get back to the benefit of integration in that way as well. And there's very few people that tell that. And when you see some of that happen in the smaller places, it's really impressive because you know how hard it is to get people on the same page.
Man, I think of again, being in Chicago, have a front row seat to a great shop, High Dive, right there, doing the NHL work, which you know is close to me. And then you see the Jeep work and the Rocket Mortgage work. To see a smaller shop like that seemingly come out of nowhere, you know, in the last 5 to 7 years, to really take on the big holding companies.
Do you think it's because I think if you look at any kind of agency business, it's never about one person. It's always about 2 or 3 leaders at the top that get each other and make that work. What do you think when you look at those kind of shops? Do you think it's creative talent? Is it flexible talent? Like, what do you think is making that sort of stuff work?
Thank you for turning the tables on me. That was a pro move. So let's look at an agency like Mischief, right? Our friend Ollie is there. You know, Greg Hahn, Bianca. The way I would look at them is that they have a creative philosophy that just permeates the entire organization.
Yeah.
And remember, Crispin back in the day was the same way, right? This is how we're going to do the work. These are our filters for that work. We even had it in Chicago at the time, maybe a little bit different, but still, like, here's how we're going to approach the work. I see it as the partners in the company creating that point of view, that space, and then hiring people that buy into that or can deliver that.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because I believe, before I moved to New York, the last thing I did before leaving London and coming here, I was doing my MBA part-time. And like, you have to do the whole, like, you've not studied anything for like 15 years and suddenly you're like, oh, there's an essay. And the whole final dissertation piece was around organizational culture in marketing service businesses. Because I think it's fascinating that, like, you got nothing. You've got a room,
right,
and you've got some founders who, as you say, like, have to create a vision. Generally, agency businesses are not created by a product. It's not like we do this thing in a different way to those things. It is that philosophy and then cultural set of behaviors that set how do you want people to show up, and then therefore, in a way, how do you want people to think about the directionally, like, where ideas come from and how. And I think it's fascinating because it's really like, it's so incumbent, therefore, on like strong leadership from a visionary, creative point of view.
But it's hard to have that courage.
Yeah,
it's hard for as you know, it's hard for especially the bigger agencies to take a point of view on work and turn down work, which is.
I think that's true in creative. Yes, I found it, you know, even in media where, like, essentially it's a little bit less philosophical. Like, those people aren't motivated in the same way around like, what's that big vision? And yet I think to work for any company, I want to know what that big vision is, right? I'm at Havas because I do believe that the vision that's now nearly 10 years old around integration and villages and collaboration, the vision that is about cultural infusion from Vivendi assets like film studios, like that, I think is very compelling. It's not easy to get right. We still have got a lot of work to do, but I buy that. So if I was going to work anywhere, I'd want to know there was that vision. And when 4 or 5 years ago, when in the media group, we didn't have a vision. I mean, you know, we weren't really anywhere. We hadn't invested in the product properly by 2016, didn't really see the onslaught of acquisitions in data and tech, so we hadn't done that. And there was just sort of nothing, and it was sort of depressing. So, you know, when my boss, who's the CEO, then says, right, take the notion of what we've invested in Meaningful and brands over the last 13 years and see where we can go with it. It got us to the vision around what was happening in media, which was very logical to me, but getting people to be okay that there was a vision, that there was a strategic, philosophical vision behind being a media agency, not just we've got this tool that does this thing, was hard. But I would think you want that. You want to come to work and know, like, why am I showing up here, right?
And why are we going to hire you?
Yeah, why? Why do you,
So Meaningful Media, I think that you were starting to go
so
there
that's where,
bit.
so that's where we got, and it's interesting because if you ask people, someone, so our CEO of the media group said to me a few weeks ago, he was recounting one of his first ever interviews in the UK for a media job with a very famous woman there called Tess Alps, who now runs Thinkbox, which is, or did until recently, the industry voice around television investment, really. And she interviewed him, and the first question she asked him was, what's your favorite TV show? And they got into this conversation very naturally in a meeting about their favorite TV shows and why. And this is back in the mid-90s, I guess. And that for me is critical, right? I should be able to walk around a media agency today and ask any of them, what's your favorite show? What's your favorite podcast? What are you listening to? Because that's the media that they're engaged with. And the problem I felt we had as an industry and as an agency back in 2016, 17 was we were, nobody was asking a client, and no one was asking anyone that worked in a media agency, what's your favorite podcast? What they were saying was, which DSP did you use? What they were saying was, like, tell me about your tech stack. And all those things were important, but the value that gets created when a client spends $20 million or $100 million in media is being created because people are avid fans of this show and they're listening and they're engaged, they're paying attention. And so to me, that was the notion of meaningful media. It was to say some media is more meaningful to me than others. Not that it's really worthy and worthwhile, but it's what I engage with. It's what I trust. It's what influences me. It's what I find most engaging. Because if I'm really leaned into that, I don't want to miss an episode. I don't want to whatever. Then probably I don't want interruptive ad experiences. So that tells us how we should be behaving. But secondly, it tells me I'm really watching this screen and that maybe this is worth spending more money on than that is if it's transient, scroll past, not seen it. And so creating levers to measure that was what we decided to do. So we said, look, we believe in meaningful brands and growing them. We think we do that by investing in the most meaningful media. And to figure out what's the most meaningful media, we've got to deliver a great media experience. And therefore, we're going to need different kinds of tools to tell you how do you build a media plan that's better than an average media plan and really is a media experience. And the logic of that to me still is truer now, 5 years on, 4 years on than it was then, because actually the industry's moved much closer to it when you think about attention metrics and how we can measure that. What that's measuring is those things I was describing as trust, engagement, influence. It was being able to now say, okay, I can put that into my tool. I now know where to show up. And if I know where to show up, and frequently those places are not necessarily ad-friendly places, because they might be CTV, they might be places you want to avoid ads more, then I think it's a creative discussion again. How do you show up in a really different way that's not an interruptive ad that I don't want to see? That's not an ad which is a 5-second Geico commercial I'm now going to see 18 times in the next 40 minutes of programming. Because, I mean, that's just bad for all of those things.
That happens on Paramount Plus a lot.
All the time.
I need to buy, I think they do it on purpose, so I have to buy the ad free.
Yes, you do.
Elevate.
So yeah, ad load. But it's interesting because like to me, those are the bits that you then get into like the person who didn't used to be a media person is suddenly quite geeky about, why do those ads show up in those ways? And like, how much is about meaningful media and how much is just still reach frequency, because you still got to get there.
I have to.
But there's a sort of quality metric that makes your life better, that makes you show up as a brand better, that makes your job more interesting, that makes the consumer experience and audience experience better. So that's been my soapbox for a while, and I think it's
so you have meaningful media,
helped us, I guess.
And then you have the platform, which is MX.
Yeah.
No conversation in second quarter 2023 wouldn't be relevant without talking about AI and generative AI.
Yes.
But I'll try to make it applicable.
Okay.
So just even in the last 2 days, the push around Auto GPT and the things that are starting to happen as it relates to even a CRM program being generated by an Auto GPT machine learning system is to me exciting and to a lot of people probably scary. How do you see like an Auto GPT platform or a generative AI platform affecting like an MX type offering, or as you think about transformation in your role, I would imagine it has to be one of your top 3 agenda items.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I'd count AI as a subset, without doing down the massive impact it's about to have and is starting to have already. I would count it as a subset of the automation conversation, right? So, and when I think about automation in agencies, I think we're very bad at it, because it doesn't matter which holding group you're in, independent agencies or otherwise, particularly in media, there is replicable, scalable work going on, which is not being scaled or repeated consistently, right? There's just people doing their thing. And so, sadly, there's jobs being done still that are the same jobs 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago people were doing, and they're still doing it manually on one spreadsheet in one computer, and then they leave and then someone's got to learn it again. So the first way in which I've been focused the last 12 months of really trying to drive what role can automation play is how do you give a client a globally consistent set of behaviors? How do you give junior staff more interesting jobs to do that actually tax their brains? It's automating away lots of the stuff that's menial and doesn't need to be there, and it's creating a repository that you can learn from. Because if you have every single media plan around the world from 5,000 clients existing, you can create learnings and learn whatever, obvious, right? But that's a journey because we're all under pressure as agencies, and so you're just stuck in the day job. So the basics of transformation happen like that. Now, once you get more of that done, I think, like you, like the potential for AI in a more generative way, in a more creative way, to, you know, create solutions we wouldn't think of ourselves, to look at problems differently. I think that's what I'm most excited about it, is that it's creative technology, because that's never been a thing before. In fact, that's always been the battle against it, right? So I think that's very compelling. Where we are is, to some extent, we're already deploying some of it. So if you look at areas of the data science work that we do as an agency, there's a lot of different AI partnerships and tests and implemented technology in many cases for optimization and thinking about the data end of it. Where we've gone on the creative end is to sort of say to everybody in the agency, test and learn. Go and play with this. Play, don't publish. Because of the scared factor and just some of the legal implications for businesses when we're an agent on their behalf, like, there's stuff we can't go and put in the world yet, right? So we're sort of in a let's play, don't publish. Now we're getting to the place where, and it's interesting, we're getting to the place where we're starting to see campaigns built and put out into the world. But interesting, that comes from the smaller agencies in the network. Because like we were saying, like, it's where does the force of the leader feel strong and that culture feel strong? And then they're the people that are probably going to experiment faster. So we're starting to get there with it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the concept of AI isn't new to Havas. I mean, we built Havas Arcadia together back in 2017, which I think was ahead of its time a bit. You know, built with IBM Watson, customer journey mapping, customer insight tool, which I thought at the time was a good precursor to what's happening here today.
Yeah, you're right.
So where's Havas going? What's the next 3-5 years hold for my friends?
I don't know. That's my job to figure that out. not done yet. I think so. The first thing we did, so this year, from a media group point of view, we're diversifying into 3 areas that I think we need to spend more time and energy on. One of those is in data services, backed by AI and more automation there. The second is around e-commerce and market. I mean, we've put a marketplace practice, a broad retail practice, which you and I have actually been talking about for 7 years.
We have.
That's happened. And so there's a version of it, there's a retail-based practice in market, which for me, that's one of the most interesting areas, right? Cool. Because that, like, we didn't really launch it as an e-commerce practice. We launched it as a retail practice. So where are the touch points across that whole journey? That's big, and now in 20 markets live, and it's just on fire. And then the third area of investment is a brand we call Havas Play, which in a way for me is a return to the past, because a lot of that cake stuff around brand activation ideas and PR and events and experience now lives there. So taking all the expertise we've got in gaming and in activating like that lives in Play now. So we've got 14 countries now live with Havas Play as a brand, which is great to see it stand up and how exciting.
And it makes sense with the Vivendi integration.
Exactly. So, and that's where, because I think, look, you know that getting Havas sitting alongside a music company and a film company and a publisher has always been like, well, that seems great, but what's the reality of it? And I think with Havas Play, we found the best way to push it into the group. So you can say, these are the people you go to connect you to the people working on Paddington or the new album from whatever. They become a good conduit.
Game or whatever it might be.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's interesting. So those are like the near term way we're transforming. I think the longer term is, I think we're getting much more growth in the integration and the village concept. And as you said before, we are smaller than certainly the top 3 major competitors in agency groups, and that's a massive benefit. And sort of more so in the last 2 years, you really feel it that people are tired of that thing and are looking for something smaller in a different way. I think the second thing is automation per se, and like I'd include the AI piece. It's that how do we fundamentally modernize what the business does compared to not other agencies, but other technology companies, SaaS platforms. There's a lot we could be doing there. So we're investing in it, acquiring in it, looking at that. And then there's just the other thing for Havas is growth in markets like India. You've spent a lot of time with our Indian teams, right? They're on fire now. It's huge what's happening in India.
Great market.
We're outsourcing more there. So there's a couple of different plays happening. So yeah, those are some start.
I love it.
That's the beginning.
Well, the future is bright for Havas with you and the rest of the team at the leadership helm, and
hope so.
I'm rooting for you all, and I'm so happy you did this with me today.
Thank you.
Where can everybody find you?
They can find me not so much on the Twitter anymore.
No, okay.
Because aren't we just done with that drama?
Yeah, I get it.
I can't take it. I can't take it. So no, I am quite loyal to the most conservative of all the social place on the internet. So come and find me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn,
okay. Greg D. James, yeah.
Perfect. Well, thanks. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay.